4,688 minutes, or 78.1 hours. That is the total runtime of all 50 2025 Academy Award nominated movies. These are the movies that the industry experts have deemed to be the best of the best for 2024. Now, each year movies are nominated that I've never even heard of, and many times those movies end up being my favorite movies of the year. Now, ain't nobody got time to watch 78 hours worth of movies, but I did it anyway, so you don't have to. And I'm going to tell you which ones are worth your time and which ones you can skip. Stay tuned for an alphabetical rapid-fire review and synopsis of 50 critically acclaimed movies. But first, last year, for the first time in several years, there was a movie nominated for an Academy Award that was unavailable for me to watch before the award ceremony. And that movie was A Boy and the Heron. Now, I finally did get to see that movie, and I found it to have breathtaking, incredible animation. Way more birds than was advertised, and it was much, much odder than I was expecting. Now, while I did like it, I didn't love it, and it did not end up fitting into the must-see category for me. And now, on to this year's nominees. So it turns out I know quite a lot more Bob Dylan songs than I thought I did. I found this movie very entertaining. It flew by, and the characters were all interesting, and the acting was stellar. Although in my opinion, Elle Fanning deserved the Best Actress nomination over Monica Barbaro. I don't feel I know much more about Dylan than I did before I watched this, which is fine, because I think that was kind of the point. Bob Dylan is weird and aloof and elusive, and he never really shows people his true self. The best thing that I can say about this is that after it ended, I was interested to learn more about the people involved and listen to their music. The story of a man with a disease that has disfigured his face tries an experimental treatment that miraculously turns him into heartthrob Sebastian Stan. He quickly learns that the disease is not fully to blame for his character and mood when he meets another man who has the same disease who is living a much happier and more fulfilling life than he is. This is a quirky movie that's hard to pin down tonally. The makeup is as good as I've ever seen. Stan is unrecognizable, and you don't realize how good that makeup is until you meet another character who isn't wearing makeup but has the same disease in real life. In my opinion, this is the best of the live-action shorts. It is quick and to the point, it's insanely tense, and very timely. It's about a father running into trouble at the immigration visa office. It's a fictional story, but it is based on stuff that happens on a daily basis. Everyone needs to see this. Written by and starring Jesse Eisenberg, the story of two cousins, played by Eisenberg and Kieran Pee in the Bed if you have a Pepsi Culkin, who are traveling to Austria with a group of strangers to visit the childhood home of their Jewish grandmother who has recently passed away. Both characters basically play themselves. Eisenberg is neurotic and uptight, Culkin is obnoxious and has no filter. It has some pretty moving scenes and a mild thematic relationship to planes, trains, and automobiles, which I just love. Now, I've only seen the first two Alien movies and this one is not as good as those first two movies, but it's still a lot of fun, and it features some wonderful special effects and adds some interesting backstory to those original films, and it gives a little bit more context to what is happening outside of the ship from that original film. It's not quite a must-see movie, but if you are a fan of the franchise, this is a great addition to that mythology. Director Sean Baker is known for making films that feel real, films like Red Rocket and The Florida Project as an example. Now, this one probably feels the most like a traditional movie in his film catalog. It starts off kind of like a much more R-rated Pretty Woman, when a woman meets a rich man of her dreams that lifts her out of a career that she doesn't love. It isn't all Pretty Woman, though. It keeps evolving into other things, and almost all of the characters are unlikable. There are a couple of really tense scenes and a couple of scenes that are kind of funny. There is no denying it is well made and full of great acting performances, and it does not end up where I was expecting it to. Two sisters who work in a sweatshop in India. And when an opportunity arises for the younger sister to make something more of herself, she has to weigh her options. This was a sweet story with two young, likable actresses. I wanted a bit more of a conclusion to the fictional side of the story, but the credits revealed a bit more detail about the real-life girl who played Anuja, which was heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. Three men who are going to have a hair transplant did not quite live up to the beautiful stop-motion animation that the movie featured. Now, I want to see behind-the-scenes footage where an artist with a jeweler's loupe spent hours meticulously handcrafting a tiny clay penis. This felt very similar in tone to Elton John's fantastic biopic Rocket Man. It's a story of a famous musician filled with larger-than-life fantastical music numbers. It features some inventive camera work and state-of-the-art visual effects, but I wouldn't quite call it a must-see movie. Without the gimmick of Robbie Williams being portrayed as a monkey, I don't think this would have gotten quite the press that it's getting currently. It surprisingly wasn't distracting that a character was a monkey and no other characters seemed to notice or mention it, but I probably would have liked this a bit more had I been more familiar with Robbie Williams and his catalog of music, and also if he was a more likable character in the movie. Rape is murder of the soul. This shows the emotional toll that a corrupt judicial system that's trying to protect its own has on the people that they are criminally abusing. The protagonist was thorough and relentless in investigating her own sexual assault. It was inspiring how positive she seemed to stay in the wake of her negative life-changing encounter and uphill legal battle. The Pope has died, and all of the cardinals must gather in Vatican City to select a new Pope. Of all of the Best Picture nominees, this, in my opinion, is the most solid. It may not be the #1 movie for acting, or for cinematography, or for story, or for costumes, or for sound, but it's in the top 3 in every single one of those categories. Edward Berger is a filmmaker to watch. Both this movie and his last movie, All Quiet on the Western Front, are master classes in filmmaking. A PG political religious thriller doesn't sound entertaining, but it really is. Conclave is basically Mean Girls, except instead of teens in high school, these are highly respected middle-aged clergymen. This expertly explains the aftermath of school shootings and how it permanently scars those who survive them, and yet it never feels politically motivated. Sam is angry, and for good reason, and I loved hearing her story, seeing her drawings, and listening to her poetry. I didn't like this one quite as much as Dune Part 1, but honestly, you kind of have to see them both because they're part of a larger story. Now, there's no denying that the special effects and sound are some of the best of the year. I just didn't quite like the journey of the story. There's nothing quite like hearing the story from the horse's mouth. Elton John has had a remarkable career, and even though he is one of the biggest music stars of all time, he comes across as remarkably normal and humble. Now, I don't listen to Elton John songs a lot, but every time I do, I'm reminded of how many classics he truly has. I was very excited to learn more about a transgender Mexican cartel boss. It was a story that I'd never heard before. Unfortunately, the execution of that story left me unfulfilled. This should not have been a musical. In my opinion, there was one song that was memorable, and not because it was catchy, but because of the lyrics. Now, you'll know it when you hear it. The acting was good, if a bit melodramatic, but in my opinion, this movie has no business being nominated for 13 Academy Awards. Breathtaking animation and incredible, likable characters who feel like real animals. A movie with no dialogue and no humans was surprisingly full of life. Watching the cast of unlikely friends navigate the world after a major flood is hard to look away from. This is a movie everyone from 3 years old to 100 years old can enjoy. It's fast-paced and full of deeper symbolism. This is easily my favorite animated movie of 2024. I haven't seen the original Gladiator since it came out in the theater 25 years ago, so I remembered very little about it. Gladiator 2 was much more entertaining than I was anticipating. Denzel Washington steals the show, but I also enjoyed Paul Mescal's character. Found the visuals to be extremely well done. It is hard to believe that such an epic movie was directed by someone who was nearly 90 years old. The death penalty, it's another touchy subject that everyone has a strong opinion on. Now, I thought this movie did a great job of showing both sides of a complicated issue by showing real footage of a man on death row, the family that he ruined committing his crime, and the mentor he found while he was on death row. Hearing each side of that story surprised me. Not everyone lands on the side you'd expect them to. This felt like a short Black Mirror episode. Found it highly entertaining and thought-provoking, but I don't think it was quite as good as Black Mirror episodes that have explored similar subjects. What would you do if you suspected that maybe you were not human because you couldn't solve a CAPTCHA? Great acting, captivating story. It's about a family in Brazil torn apart when the father disappears. It's hard to believe how corrupt countries and governments can be when dozens of high-profile people go missing and never are seen again, and nobody can do anything about it. A dialogue-free tale of a father suffering from PTSD and his daughter living in a secluded home. I get the overall message of the story, but I didn't connect with it quite as much as I wanted to. I love the wail of the problem that presented itself, and I thought the ending was pretty powerful, but I just didn't love the entire journey. This was engrossing and maddening. It's a documentary that takes city cameras and police cameras and shows an incident in Chicago from multiple angles when a man was shot by police. There is no way to watch this and not have an opinion about what happened. In my mind, there was very clearly a person at fault, And that person, I think they knew it, and they were doing everything they could to try to justify their actions. And body cameras don't solve every he said, she said issue, but it has to help when you can witness an incident in real time without having to rely on faulty memories of those involved. Inside Out is one of my favorite Pixar movies. In the sequel, it didn't break any new ground, but it was more of the same, which is A-okay in my book. It was clever and funny, it was beautifully animated, and it was full of new emotions that felt like natural additions to the franchise. If you like the first movie, you're going to like this one too. I love watching kids learn about life and finding a purpose. Watching these kids work their butts off to play Ode to Joy in the school band was heartwarming, even if the teaching methods felt a bit heavy-handed to American audiences. Now, I'm going to admit, I did get sick of hearing Ode to Joy in these 23 minutes, but seeing the look of joy on these kids' faces was totally worth it. This franchise has no reason to have as many movies as it does. Now, this is the first movie after the way better than it should have been trilogy from the past 15 years or so. The story brought new and interesting elements into this franchise. The CGI apes are as good as any that I've ever seen. I never felt like I was watching a mostly animated movie. Now, if you like the other 97 movies in this franchise, you're gonna like this one. It's basically a typical big budget action movie. This is a cute and quirky story of a kid who buys a bag of candy that when eaten gives him some temporary powers to do things that he can't normally do. It almost feels like he's just eating some kind of hallucinogen. The story was cute and it ended on a pretty heartwarming note. As advertised, Maria has great cinematography, and Angelina Jolie did a great job acting in her role. But I have never been able to get into the groove of this director who made Spencer and El Conde. All of his movies have excellent acting and cinematography, but they're just a bit slower paced and, at least to me, boring. But if you want to learn more about Maria Callas, a famous opera singer who's having some personality issues, you might like this one. This is the most Tim Burton looking movie, not made by Tim Burton, I think I've ever watched. I was transfixed watching the depressed middle-aged claymation story of Hoarder Grace, her friends, and her twin brother who she was separated from in childhood. The story gets pretty dark, but the movie never felt dark. I love the creativity in the animation and the quirkiness of the characters in the story. This is probably my second favorite animated movie of the year behind Flow. Filmmakers took a risky swing to have the entire movie be told in the first person, meaning we are looking through the main character's eyes and seeing what he sees. When he has a conversation with someone, they are talking directly into the camera. I couldn't help but think of how much it reminded me of those old full motion video games on the Sega CD, like Sewer Shark, where the characters are talking right into the camera to you, the player. Now, while the story of the boy who did nothing wrong, who was sent to a boarding school where kids go missing and are treated less than human, was captivating, I think I would have actually preferred this quite a bit more had it been a traditional movie and not told in the first person. Now, even though I didn't love the way the movie was filmed, that perspective was able to give us some truly striking cinematography, and the movie ended on quite a showstopper of a scene. It is worth at least a one-time watch. I am not educated enough on the subject to make any meaningful arguments on the war between Israel and Palestine. No other land is clearly on the side of Palestine, and seeing some of the things the people in this movie went through pre-war, it isn't hard to see why that war broke out. This is heartbreaking, but it is something that everyone needs to watch. I've never really connected with Robert Eggers' movies, The Witch, The Lighthouse, and The Northman, but I really enjoyed Nosferatu. Eggers perfectly captures the gothic atmosphere that you need in a vampire tale. The setting and costumes look like they came straight out of Harry Potter's Diagon Alley or A Muppet Christmas Carol. Lily Rose Depp was excellent in her role as the tortured muse of Nosferatu. With the atmosphere, that's what really sells the movie. Nosferatu is almost always in the shadows, but you can just feel how icky and intimidating and plain terrifying that he is. I kept wanting to see more of him. When you finally get to see him, he actually lived up to the grotesque look that I had in my head. While I wouldn't call this movie truly scary, it's definitely a horror film that has some striking and terrifying visuals in the third act. Hearing about the war in Ukraine from across the world doesn't do it justice. This movie does a great job of showing that it's not just soldiers fighting, it is everyday people. And in the case of the protagonist of Porcelain War, they make porcelain art to try to take their mind off of the horrors going on all around them. I cannot believe I had never heard of the 1972 Munich Olympics hostage situation. It was a massive world news event, and even Steven Spielberg made a movie about it called Munich. Yet, me, oblivious to the world around me, watched this not knowing how it was going to end. It was tense, and it felt like the early 1970s. Now, even though it is nothing like the movie Saturday Night about the first episode of SNL, the two movies looked similar, and they had a similar tense behind-the-camera narrative. September 5th is a good movie, but in the genre that I just made up of tense 1970s behind-the-camera narratives, I think Saturday Night's just a little bit better. A group of incarcerated men find meaning in their prison drama club putting on productions for the other prisoners. This is a true story, and many of the actors in the movie were real-life inmates who participated in the real-life drama program. It's a beautiful story, and it's both uplifting and depressing. All of that being said, I didn't personally care for the direction, which left me kind of unimpressed. I'm in the minority here, so this is still probably worth a watch, but it's not a must-see. I am so upset that I didn't love this. The biggest drawback is that it's way too long. The editing and the research required to pull off a documentary of this scope is to be commended, though. Every scene features so much to take in. There are multiple languages being spoken, and there's on-screen text and real-time fact-checking and references, and it's hard to keep up with all of it. On top of that, the direction and the editing is pretty experimental, with many of the scenes overlaid with famous jazz musicians playing abstract jazz. The entire movie feels like it follows the flow of that jazz abstraction. I think it was just a bit too much for me to fully take in. I still enjoyed learning about the Democratic Republic of Congo and its immense natural resources, causing it to be the center of a lot of international political fighting, but I can't say that I enjoyed the movie itself. It is hard to believe that anyone could treat people the way the Native Americans were treated by the Catholic Church in this movie. There are a lot of hard truths sprinkled throughout this documentary. The fact that both Sugarcane and Nickel Boys are about schools with unmarked graves makes me think this atrocity is not completely uncommon. As far as the storytelling goes, the movie is a bit slow and somber. Not that a story like this should be entertaining, but I did find my mind wandering a bit during the slow pace, but every once in a while somebody would say something that would bring me right back, and my goodness, some horrific things happened to these people. I'm honestly not sure who this movie was made for. If you're a fan of Trump, you're not going to like it because of the way he's portrayed. If you're not a fan of Trump, you're going to think they went too easy on him, and you're sick of hearing about his shenanigans, and you're probably not going to watch it anyway. Every time that Jeremy Strong's character spoke, he kind of moved his head like this, and it reminded me of Quagmire from Family Guy saying giggity. If this was an original story about a fake person, I would have liked it much more. It is nearly impossible to make a 3-hour and 15-minute movie not feel pretentious. The Brutalist is definitely pretentious, but it was also engrossing and entertaining. I think it would have been fairly easy to edit out 30 to 45 minutes without changing the story about Adrian Brody as an immigrant who also happens to be an architectural genius in the 1940s who comes to America, befriends a millionaire, and is hired to build a massive building that is really just to stroke the ego of that millionaire. Now, Adrian Brody's niece looked so much like Daniel Radcliffe, and Guy Pearce's millionaire reminded me a lot of Lois's dad, Carter Pewterschmidt, in Family Guy, that I found them both to be kind of distracting. Now, this is a heady movie that I don't think I fully got. I don't regret watching it, but I probably don't need to see it again. This was the wild card. This was a movie that I never even heard of before the Oscar nominations came out, and it is quite a doozy. I was immediately drawn into the World War I era black and white squalor of Caroline, who works as a seamstress, hence the name The Girl with the Needle. Now, things keep getting darker, and the movie ends up being easily the darkest and most disturbing movie nominated for any category this year. The story was a little bit slower paced, but I find myself drawn in. And in my opinion, the actress who played Caroline gave one of, if not the best acting performance of the year. And while it is a hard watch, it is a very well-made movie that is worth watching at least once. Oh, and by the way, The Girl with the Needle is not named that because she's a seamstress. I will never understand how people can be so cruel. Poachers know that rhino horns do not have magical powers, but they are willing to kill rhinos anyway and sell those horns to people who do believe they have magical powers. And this is a powerful story of the rangers who are tasked with protecting these endangered animals at all costs. It's not an easy watch, but it is an important one. A pretty tense short little thriller about a train that is stopped and boarded by some sort of militia looking for people without papers. We don't learn a lot about the characters or who or what they are looking for, and while the execution and the technical aspects of the film were good, I think there's probably a better way to have told this story. Oren is 89 years old and has spent the last 50 years playing double bass in the New York Philharmonic. She feels much younger in personality and appearance, and the fact that she is still carrying that giant instrument around at her age is impressive. The story explores her journey and the struggles of being in an orchestra when no other women were. In Iran, a lawyer is promoted to a position that requires him to carry a gun and to keep his job activities secret, as it could make his family and himself victims of political violence. When the gun goes missing, he suspects either his wife or one of his 2 daughters. And this is full of excellent performances with characters you grow to truly care about, and there is a ton of tension. Unfortunately, the third act goes a direction that I didn't particularly love, and it's about 45 minutes too long. I did find the very final frame to be beautiful and haunting, though. I was pleasantly surprised by this movie. Even though it didn't quite make it into must-see territory, I was entertained the full way through. The story of a group of black women working against all odds to deliver mail during World War II is a story I'd never heard before, and it was pretty inspiring. The movie itself was pretty formulaic, and it was easy to see what was coming around every corner from a mile away. Kerry Washington gave an excellent acting performance, and Dean Norris gave an interesting acting performance with a very strange accent. Were people really this hateful and blatantly racist in the 1940s? I love the fact that a gross-out monster movie is up for Best Picture. I am a huge fan of cheesy 80s gore-fest movies, and The Substance feels like it drew a lot of inspiration from John Carpenter's The Thing and Frank Henenlotter, who made both Basket Case and Frankenhooker. But for some reason, I did not fully connect with this movie. It's a bit too long, and I think it would have been easy to cut out 30 minutes of gratuity without actually losing the message the movie was preaching. There's no denying it is a wild ride and not quite like anything else out there, but I just didn't love it quite as much as everyone else seems to. This is another must-see crowd pleaser. It's about a robot stranded on an island where she must raise a small goose from egg to migration. It's such a touching story that shows the struggles and thrills of being a new parent, wrapped in the story full of memorable animals and a robot that can only act logically. Roz is my new favorite movie robot since Baymax in Big Hero 6. A cute stop-motion animated movie about an inventor, his invention that goes haywire, and his dog who always is around to save the day. Now, I hate to say it, but this was my least favorite of the animated movie nominees. I've never disliked Wallace and Gromit, but I've never loved any of the movies either. It's fun and clever, and it's even funny in some parts, and it's able to be watched by the whole family, which is a huge plus. I really have nothing bad to say about it. Everyone loves it except for me, and I have no good reason not to love it. Technically speaking, the animation is striking, original, and impressive. It felt like a skit that would have been on the early 2000s MTV show Wonder Chosen. It's about a bunch of miniature claymation figures who starred alongside a human on a children's TV show, but now the host has died and they are left wondering what to do with the rest of their lives. Wicked is just such a crowd pleaser. It's a huge blockbuster full of iconic characters who have been around longer than 99% of the population has been alive. It features award-winning songs from a Tony-winning musical, and it's just a magical spectacle to behold. It feels like a throwback to the 90s when we would get these epic nearly 3-hour spectacles more regularly. Now, if you like The Wizard of Oz, you at least owe it to yourself to watch this once. This was a cute coming-of-age story about that time in life when kissing is gross, but you can't quit thinking about it, or commenting on it, or watching other people do it, and then before you know it, you want to do it too. And as always, congratulations to all the Academy Award nominees and winners, and thank you for sharing your art with the world.